They say you can hear the truth in a room long before anyone speaks it, in the way people lower their voices when you walk past, in the way laughter stops just half a second too late. On my wedding day, standing in a cramped dressing room that smelled like hairspray and wilting roses, I heard everything I was never supposed to hear. She looks like she should be serving the champagne, not drinking it. Someone snickered just outside the door. Another voice, sharper, older, dripping with money, replied, "Damien always had a soft spot for broken things. This one just comes with cheap lace." I stared at myself in the mirror, at the girl in the simple off-white dress, the girl with the drugstore makeup and the borrowed necklace, and tried to marry that reflection to the person they were talking about. The dress wasn't designer, but it fit my body like it cared. My hair wasn't styled by a celebrity, but I'd spent an hour curling it myself, one careful section at a time. I looked, not rich, not glamorous, but like someone who had done the best she could with what she had. And apparently, that was unforgivable. The knock on the door was brisk, like the person on the other side owned the building and the street and the city beyond it. In a way, she thought she did. "Lena," Veronica Cole sang, pushing the door open before I could answer. "We need to talk, and it really shouldn't take more than 5 minutes if you don't make it difficult." She swept into the room wrapped in a navy silk dress that probably cost more than my car, her perfume aggressively floral. Her lips painted the kind of red that made you think of warning signs. 2 other women, both in matching pastel dresses, hovered behind her like well-trained shadows. I smoothed my dress automatically. "Is everything okay?" I asked. My voice sounded small in that room, even to me. Veronica smiled, but it was the kind of smile that had teeth. "Everything is perfect, dear. The flowers are here. The guests are seated. Damien is waiting at the altar, trying not to sweat through his tux. There is just one tiny formality." She snapped her fingers, and one of the pastel women stepped forward with a leather folder. I already knew what it was. I'd seen the word prenup in the email weeks ago, tucked into a sentence about standard procedure and protecting family assets. Damien had brushed it off when I'd asked, telling me it was just something his parents insisted on and that it didn't mean he loved me any less. I had wanted to believe him so badly that I forced myself not to look too closely. "We sent you the draft," Veronica said, flipping open the folder and pulling out a stack of papers with yellow tabs. But since I assumed legal jargon might be overwhelming, we had our attorneys simplify it. "All you need to do is sign where it's marked. It's very straightforward. If, God forbid, you and Damien were to divorce, you leave with what you brought in." She glanced around the room, taking in the thrift store veil, the scuffed heels, the fake pearl earrings, which, as we can all see, isn't much. One of the pastel women snorted, and then tried to turn it into a cough. My stomach lurched, but I forced my hand not to shake as I took the pen she offered. "I thought prenups were supposed to be discussed with a lawyer," I said, aiming for lightness and missing by a mile. "You know, before the wedding day. Don't be dramatic." Veronica waved a hand. "You had weeks. If you'd had an attorney worth anything, he would have told you the same thing mine did. This is generous. We're not monsters, Lena. There's even a modest settlement if the marriage ends after a year." Damien insisted on that. "He's sentimental." The way she said sentimental made it sound like a disease. I looked down at the papers without really reading them. Paragraphs of text blurred together. Separate property, marital property, waiver of rights, no claim to family shares. None of it surprised me. Of course, Veronica would want to build a wall between me and the Cole fortune, as if I'd ever imagined myself swimming in their money. All I'd ever wanted was their son, the man who brought cheap flowers to my apartment and kissed my forehead before falling asleep. I thought of his lopsided smile, the way he'd whispered, "I don't care if my parents approve or not, I'm choosing you." I thought of the nights we'd sat on my second-hand couch, planning a future that didn't involve prenups and leather folders and women who smelled like expensive contempt. "If I don't sign?" I asked quietly. Veronica's eyes hardened, the mask slipping for just a moment. "Then there is no wedding," she said simply. "We will inform the guests that you had a change of heart. And I assure you, dear, whatever version of this story you try to tell afterward, people will choose to believe us." She tapped the papers with one manicured nail. But sign, and you get the fairy tale. You get the Cole name, Damien's devotion, and a life far better than the one you crawled out of. It really is an easy decision. The word crawled landed between us like something wet and ugly. The old me, the girl I used to be, the one who grew up in rooms bigger than this entire bridal suite, would have laughed in her face. But the Lena I had built over the past 8 years, the girl who rode the bus and counted tips and paid rent late more often than on time, knew better than to pick a fight she wasn't ready to finish. I picked up the pen. "It's fine," I said, before my pride could talk me out of it. "I love Damien. I'm not marrying him for his money. I don't want anything that isn't mine." Veronica's smile returned, softer now, satisfied. "Good girl," she murmured. "Damien always did have a weakness for strays. At least this one can sign her name." I signed where the yellow tabs told me to sign. My hand moved on autopilot, my brain somewhere far away, standing in another room with different walls, listening to a different woman's heartbreak. When I finished, I handed the pen back. For a moment, Veronica didn't move. She just looked at me, her gaze sliding over my face, my dress, the small bruise on my wrist from where a tray had tipped at the restaurant 2 nights before, and caught me off guard. Then, almost lazily, she reached out and wrapped her fingers around my forearm. The grip was deceptively light at first, then tightened until I felt the press of her nails through my skin. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice dropping low enough that the pastel shadows couldn't quite hear. "You may be marrying my son, but don't confuse that with becoming one of us. You will smile when I tell you to smile. You will wear what I choose, sit where I seat you, speak only when it benefits the family. If you embarrass us, if you step out of line, this," she flicked the prenup pages with her free hand, "ensures you walk away with nothing but whatever tip money you've squirreled away from waiting tables. Do you understand?" Pain burned along my arm where her nails dug in. For a split second, heat flared in my chest. The old heat, the one that remembered lawyers who worked for my father and judges who took his calls in the middle of the night. I swallowed it down. I'd walked away from that world for a reason. "I understand," I said softly. I lifted my eyes to hers and smiled, a small, almost apologetic curve of my lips that made her relax just enough. "I just wonder if you do." She blinked, thrown off. "What's that supposed to mean?" I glanced at the reflection in the mirror, her in her navy silk and diamonds, me in my off-white dress with the loose thread at the hem. On the surface, we looked exactly like what she believed we were. Predator and prey, a queen and charity case. "It means," I said, turning my arm just enough to make her let go or risk leaving obvious marks, "you're very confident your family will look the same after today as it did before. And you're very sure I'm the one who has something to lose." I leaned in, lowering my own voice to match hers. I could see the faint lines around her eyes that even good surgery couldn't erase. "I'm just not sure you've calculated every variable." "Is that a threat?" she hissed. But she let go of my arm. I smoothed the fabric of my dress over the sting. "No," I said. "It's a reminder. Weddings change things. Sometimes not in the way we expect. They say the past has a way of finding you, even when you bury it beneath a new name, a cheap apartment, and the illusion of ordinary life." For 8 years I had been Lena Hart, designer of cafe logos, payer of overdue rent, collector of thrift store furniture. It wasn't a bad life. It was just small, and small felt safe. But as the choir began their first hesitant notes and the guests settled into their rows, the name I had abandoned all those years ago whispered in the back of my mind like a ghost, Elena Hartwell. The woman I used to be had marble floors under her feet, and a last name printed on skyscrapers. She was born in a mansion that smelled like lilacs and ink from financial magazines, the daughter of Richard and Caroline Hartwell, who were as close to American royalty as money could buy. And she had a sister, Melissa, beautiful, fearless, trusting. The family used to say Melissa had never met a man she couldn't forgive, until she met the wrong one. I still remember the night it all shattered. Melissa had married a charming entrepreneur named Evan, the kind who made everyone feel like the smartest person in the room. My father adored him. My mother called him the son we never had. He smiled like he believed in forever. Then one morning, Forever packed its bags and took every cent of my sister's trust fund with it. Evan had forged signatures, transferred accounts, and left a trail of debt so deep it nearly swallowed our family name. But it wasn't the money that destroyed Melissa, it was the betrayal. She stopped speaking, stopped eating, and eventually stopped moving altogether. She sat by the east window every day, staring at the garden as if waiting for an apology that would never come. My father tried to buy her peace with doctors and retreats. My mother tried to drown the shame in charity galas. I just watched her fade, one breath at a time, and promised myself that if I ever loved someone, it would never be because of their bank account. That night, I packed a bag, cut my cards, and disappeared. I sold the car, changed my hair, and moved to Atlanta with a resume full of half-truths. I became Lena Hart, nobody's daughter, nobody's target, and for the first time, I could breathe. I rented a studio with walls thin enough to hear my neighbors' arguments and dreams close enough to touch. I bought coffee from street vendors who knew my name. I worked 12-hour days designing flyers for people who thought graphic designer meant make it pop. It was humble, exhausting, real. I told myself that meant it was mine. Then, 2 years ago, Damian Cole walked into my life carrying a smile that could sell forgiveness to a sinner. I met him in a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday. He asked if the seat was taken, and I said no. That was how most disasters begin, so gently you don't even notice. We talked for hours about work, ambition, the city. He told me he'd built his company from scratch, that his parents had given him nothing but lessons in resilience. Hard work doesn't scare me, he said, eyes bright. Entitlement does. The irony should have burned, but back then I didn't know enough to smell smoke. I laughed. He reached for my hand like he'd known me for years, for months. He made me believe in something pure. He remembered how I took my coffee, called when I was too tired to talk, left notes in my sketchbooks that said, "You're magic, even on your worst days." I'd never had anyone look at me that way, not even when I had everything. He met Lena and loved her, or so I thought. When he first took me to his parents' house, the lie of simplicity began to crack. The Coles estate looked like a museum that had forgotten to close. Every surface gleamed. Every painting looked like it judged me. Veronica greeted me with a smile so tight it could cut glass. She looked me up and down, her eyes pausing on the hem of my dress, the off-brand shoes, and the thrifted purse I'd spent an hour cleaning. "Damian didn't mention you were artistic," she said, like art was contagious. His father, Graham, shook my hand the way men do when they're searching for weakness. "You design logos?" he asked, drawing out the word as if it might bite him. "Yes," I said, smiling. "And billboards, and websites." "Websites," he repeated, turning away before I could answer. Damian tried to smooth the silence, his hand at my back like a promise, but even then, I felt something cold watching me from across the table. Later that night, when the dishes were cleared and the polite laughter was done, Veronica leaned close and whispered, "You seem sweet. Just remember, dear, fairy tales don't last if the princess forgets she's not royalty." I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling of Damian's apartment, at the faint crack near the light fixture, wondering what they'd say if they knew who I really was. Would they still call me unworthy? Or would they smile wider, calculating faster, rearranging the chessboard to make space for my fortune? That was the moment I understood why I'd hidden my name. Money doesn't buy love, it only makes the hunters come running. But secrets have expiration dates, and mine was already starting to spoil. I thought of Melissa, still sitting by the window, her life swallowed by a man who wore sincerity like a costume. I thought of my father's voice the day I left. "The world isn't kind to women who forget their value, Lena. Don't let them price you." I had laughed then, thinking he was warning me about poverty. Now I knew he was warning me about men like Damian. The morning after the dinner, I stood in front of my cracked mirror brushing my hair. The early light caught my reflection, and for a moment I saw both versions of myself, the heiress and the nobody, flickering in the glass like ghosts fighting for the same body. "Who are you? Really?" I asked my reflection. She didn't answer. But somewhere deep inside, I felt the old heartbeat of power, the quiet certainty that I wasn't powerless at all. I just hadn't chosen to fight yet. That day, I tucked my real driver's license, Elena Marie Hartwell, into a small box and slid it beneath the floorboard of my closet. I told myself it was only a precaution, but part of me already knew. Someday, I'd need it again. That someday was closer than anyone at that wedding could have imagined. As I stood at the altar beside Damien, listening to the preacher's words dissolve into static, I caught a glimpse of Veronica's satisfied smile and Arya's smug little smirk. They thought they were watching a girl from nowhere stumble into their world, grateful to be invited. What they didn't know was that I had built worlds far bigger than theirs and burned them down when necessary. They didn't know that the name I'd buried could still shake the walls of their empire. I let my lips curve into the smallest smile, the kind you can't photograph but can feel. Play your part, Lena, I told myself. The act is almost over. For now, silence was my weapon, and patience was my stage. Soon, they would all learn who they had really invited to their table. They say love doesn't really make you blind. It just teaches you which parts of the truth to look away from. By the time I stood at the altar with Damien's fingers wrapped around mine and the minister's words buzzing like background noise, I already knew something was wrong. I just hadn't told anyone that while they were watching a romance, I was watching a crime scene unfold in slow motion. It hadn't started with a dramatic confession or a stranger crashing through church doors. It began a month earlier with a single phone notification and a version of me who still wanted to believe people could be cruel and careless, but not calculated. Damien had been coming home late all week, always with the same line. Investor meetings, he would say casually, loosening his tie, smelling of whiskey and perfume that wasn't mine. Mom's pushing hard, he told me one night, collapsing onto the couch. She says married founders look more stable. Family men attract long-term money. I'd joked that I hoped the investors liked my thrift store dresses. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said I was perfect. It was almost enough. The third night, his phone buzzed on the couch while he took a call on the landline in the kitchen. I picked it up to silence the sound, not to snoop, or at least that's what I told myself. A group chat preview lit the screen. The title read, Family Business. Veronica, she'll sign. Girls like that always do. Graham, make sure the prenup covers the shares. Last thing we need is a waitress walking off with part of the company. Arya, relax. She'll be lucky if she leaves with a used car and a sad little story. Damien, it's handled. Focus on the investors. I stared at the word waitress until the letters blurred. I had never carried plates in a restaurant in my life, but to them my address and my cheap wardrobe were enough to file me under service worker. I set the phone back exactly where I'd found it and pasted on a smile when Damien walked back into the room. He never noticed the way my shoulders tightened, or how my eyes didn't quite meet his. After that, the world shifted half an inch to the left. The glowing articles about his visionary startup all came from the same two obscure websites. When I checked them, both were owned by anonymous companies connected to a coal-holding firm. The sleek office address on his business card turned out to be a co-working space where, according to the receptionist, he rented a conference room a few times a week. I told myself it was normal for young companies to be messy. I clung to that story until the night Veronica's fingers left red crescents on my arm after dinner. In the harsh bathroom light, her voice replayed in my head. You smile when I tell you to. You walk away with nothing if you step out of line. My skin throbbed where her nails had dug in, and for the first time in years I heard my father's voice instead of hers. The world isn't kind to women who forget their value, Elena. Don't let them price you. I'd spent 8 years hiding that value, convinced anonymity was safer than power. But staring at the bruises on my arm, I realized anonymity was exactly what made me useful to people like the Coles. They saw a girl with no safety net, no lawyers, no name that meant anything. They saw someone they could use and discard. I rinsed my hands, dried them slowly, and looked at myself in the mirror. If you walk into this blind, that's on you, I whispered. The next day, while Veronica bragged at brunch about their attorney who had never lost a case, I decided I needed someone who worked on the other side of families like hers. That night, far from their neighborhood, in a cafe with chipped tables and burnt coffee, I opened my laptop and searched for a private investigator whose reviews didn't mention being nice, only being effective. That was how I found Marcus Lee. We met 2 days later in another coffee shop, the kind with mismatched chairs and a constant hiss of the espresso machine. He sat opposite me, glanced at my plain dress and nervous hands, and said, "You don't look like someone who hires me." "What do your clients usually look like?" I asked. "Desperate," he said, "or dangerous. Sometimes both. You look like someone who's trying very hard to pretend everything's fine." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were scraps, Damien's business card, the names of his parents, a printed screenshot of the family business chat, the glossy company brochure, and the address of the coal estate. "I don't want you to start with my fiancé," I said. "I want you to start with his family. Their money, their companies, how they handle people who stop being useful." Marcus flipped through the pages, his casual expression shifting to something sharper. "Any reason you're asking?" he said. I thought of Melissa sitting by the window, my sister hollowed out by a husband who had married her bank account. I thought of Veronica's nails, of Arya's too familiar touch on Damien's arm, of Graham's bored eyes when I tried to make conversation. "Let's just say I grew up watching what happens when you marry into the wrong story," I answered. "I don't intend to replay the same ending." He studied me for a beat longer than comfortable, then nodded. "All right, Miss Hart. I'll day. Give me a week." He didn't need a week. 3 nights later, my phone rang just after midnight. Damien was asleep beside me, one arm heavy over my waist. I slipped out of bed, stepped into the hallway, and answered in a whisper. "This is Lena." "This is Marcus," he said, all humor gone. "If any of the Coles are in earshot, hang up and call me back somewhere else." I glanced at the bedroom door. "I'm alone. What did you find?" He exhaled. "Short version? You're not paranoid. Their money is dirty, and your fiancé's golden boy company is right in the middle of it." The floor felt a little less stable under my bare feet. "Explain," I said. "The company you think you're marrying into is basically a funnel," he told me. "Investors pour money in, believing they're buying into promising tech. The money flows through and ends up in accounts owned by other entities that trace back to your future in-laws. I've seen doctored reports, fake invoices, offshore transfers. If a regulator ever took a hard look, the whole thing would fall apart." I sank down with my back against the wall, the phone pressed so tightly to my ear it hurt. "You're sure?" "I don't wake people up at midnight for guesses," he replied. "And that's just the financial side. Your future mother-in-law has history. She used to be a secretary at one of Graham's companies. Back then, he was married to someone else. His first wife died in an alleged fall down a staircase. A witness saw a blonde woman leaving right before the accident, then withdrew the statement and took a long, fully funded vacation. The payments line up too neatly to be coincidence." My skin prickled. I pictured Veronica on the stairs at the estate, gliding down like she owned gravity. "You can't prove she did anything," I said, though I wasn't sure whether I was arguing with him or with my own conscience. "No," Marcus agreed. "Not now, but it tells me how they operate. Quietly, permanently. What really matters for you is the prenup." My stomach tightened. "What about it?" "They filed an updated version," he said. "It includes a clause tied to a big life insurance policy on your fiancé. If he dies within the first year of marriage, most of the payout and his assets won't go to his wife. They go to his designated beneficiary." I already knew who it would be, but the words still stung when he said it. "Arya," he confirmed. "She's listed on the policy. She's on the company paperwork. And based on emails I've seen, she's very invested in this wedding happening on schedule. Every serious girlfriend he had before you disappeared under convenient circumstances. Jobs lost after meetings with her. Leases canceled. One girl moved across the country days after a large payment hit her account. I don't need a conspiracy board to see the pattern." For a moment, all I could hear was the rush of my own blood. In their version of the story, I was nothing more than a prop, the grateful nobody in a simple dress, proof that Damien was stable and respectable, a face to smile beside him in photos while money moved behind the scenes. If the company crashed, I'd be the naive wife who didn't know. If he died early, I'd walk away with a token settlement while Arya collected the real prize. "Send me everything," I said, when my voice finally came back. "Documents, screenshots, copies of the filings, names of investors if you have them." "I can do that," Marcus said. "But I have to ask, what are you planning to do?" I thought briefly about running. It would be so simple to slip the ring off my finger, leave a note, disappear into another city under another alias. I'd done it before. But then I saw Melissa's empty eyes in my mind, the way she had never really come back from the day her husband emptied her accounts. I saw faceless investors who would never be invited into marble dining rooms, people who had bet everything on numbers Veronica's attorney had polished. I saw Evelyn at the bottom of a staircase no one mentioned anymore. "I'm going to make sure they don't get to write this ending," I said quietly. "Not for me, not for anyone else." Marcus was silent for a heartbeat. "That sounds like you're declaring war, Miss Hart." For 8 years I had been only Lena out loud. The other name lived in a box under my floorboards and in the minds of people who assumed I was gone. I was suddenly tired of hiding from myself. "It's Elena," I said. The word felt like sliding a key into a familiar lock. Elena Hartwell. There was a soft curse on the other end of the line. "As in Hartwell Holdings?" he asked. "As in your father could buy and sell half this city before lunch?" "That one," I said. "The Coles think they picked up a stray. They have no idea who they dragged into their house." When I hung up, the hallway felt different, narrower and somehow more solid. I went to the closet, lifted the loose floorboard, and pulled out the small metal box I had sworn I'd never open again. Inside were my real ID, a credit card linked to accounts I hadn't touched in years, and a silver bracelet Melissa had fastened around my wrist the night before her wedding, laughing about how we'd always protect each other. I slipped the bracelet on, then picked up the card with my father's private number and dialed. He answered on the first ring, the way powerful men do. "Hello? Hi, Dad," I said softly. "It's Elena." There was a sharp intake of breath, then his voice shifted from sleep to command. "Elena, are you safe?" "For now," I said. "But I won't be if I keep pretending I don't see what's happening. I need the Hartwell legal team at my apartment tomorrow, and everything we have on financial fraud, shell companies, and insurance scams." I looked toward the bedroom, where Damien slept peacefully in a life he thought he understood. "I think the family I'm about to marry into has been stealing from people for years," I said, "and I'm done being the only one in the dark." My father didn't ask why I'd left or why I had stayed away so long. He just said, "Text me the address. We'll be there in 2 hours." I glanced at the ring on my finger and the worn furniture around me, at the version of myself I'd built in this small apartment. "Make it 3, I replied. "I need a little time to say goodbye to Lena. They say the morning of your wedding is supposed to feel like a dream. But when I opened my eyes that day, it felt like standing on the edge of a storm. The city outside my hotel window was still half asleep, gray light on wet pavement, church bells echoing somewhere far away, but inside my chest, everything was awake and alive and sharp. My dress hung near the mirror, white and deceptively innocent, its silk folds whispering each time the air conditioner sighed. It looked like purity, but I knew better. It was armor. The night before, my apartment had turned into a war room. My father arrived first, wearing the same tailored calm he used in board meetings where billions changed hands. Behind him came 3 of his lawyers, 2 investigators, and my mother, who hadn't seen me in 8 years but still recognized the way I paced when I was furious. She reached for me, whispering my name like a prayer she wasn't sure would be answered. I let her hug me, just once, long enough to feel her heartbeat. "You shouldn't do this publicly," she said when she pulled back. "You can end this quietly. Let your father handle them." My father nodded. "We can freeze their accounts, expose them in court, destroy them by next week. You don't have to be in the room."
Oh my gosh,
I
you
looked
look
between them, 2
absolutely
people who had spent their
stunning.
lives negotiating power,
I can't
and
believe it, you're
realized they didn't
breathtaking.
understand what this was. "If we do it quietly," I said, "they'll spin it. They'll call me bitter, unstable, a liar. People will forget in a week. But if I do it at the altar, in front of everyone who believed them, they can't rewrite it. It becomes truth." My father studied me for a long moment, his jaw tight. "You sound like your mother when she sued a senator," he said finally. My mother smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "And like your father when he built his first empire." The lawyers spread files across my kitchen table. Screens lit up with financial statements, fake investors, contracts linking Damien's company to offshore accounts. Each document was a nail in the Coles coffin. Marcus arrived last, coffee in one hand, a flash drive in the other. "You've got enough here to bury them twice," he said. The FBI contact is on standby. Once you go public, the agents in the crowd will move. Good, I said. They'll have front row seats. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch until dawn, staring at the flash drive in my hand. Somewhere between exhaustion and adrenaline, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I was grieving the girl who had been. Lena, the version of me who wanted to be loved for her simplicity, who thought hiding her name would protect her heart, was gone. I didn't kill her. They did. The sun crept up, turning the skyline gold. I showered, brushed my hair, and slipped into the gown. My mother helped me zip the back, her hands trembling. "You look beautiful," she whispered. "You look like yourself again." My sister Melissa appeared in the doorway. For a second, I couldn't breathe. She looked fragile but alive in a way I hadn't seen in years, her eyes clear instead of vacant. She held something small in her hands, a folded handkerchief embroidered with our initials, the one our mother used to give us when we were nervous before piano recitals. "For luck," she said softly. Her voice cracked from disuse. I froze, then took it, my throat tightening. "You're talking again." She smiled, a little shaky. "You gave me a reason to." I hugged her carefully, as if she might break. "Thank you," I whispered. "For everything." She pulled back, eyes steady. "Make them remember who you are, Elena." When my father knocked on the door a few minutes later, the lawyers and investigators were gone, replaced by a strange, tense calm. "It's time," he said. "The cars are ready." We drove in silence. The city rolled past coffee carts opening, children in uniforms waiting for buses, strangers walking dogs. Ordinary life. I wondered how many people out there were pretending to be someone smaller just to survive. At the church, the crowd was already buzzing. 300 guests, a photographer from a lifestyle magazine, investors, socialites, distant relatives, everyone who mattered to the Coles. They didn't know they were about to watch their hosts implode. My father squeezed my hand before we stepped out of the car. "If you change your mind, we leave. Say the word." I shook my head. "I've waited 8 years to stop running. I'm done changing my mind." Inside the bridal suite, Veronica was already there, radiant and poisonous in a silver gown. She didn't knock. She never did. "You're late," she said, voice cool. "For someone marrying into a family like ours, punctuality is respect." I turned slowly, letting her see the calm she couldn't touch. "You're right," I said. "Today, respect is everything." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't play clever, dear. You'll sign what you're told. Smile when I tell you to, and keep your head down. This family has rules." I stepped closer until the space between us was heavy with her perfume. "So I've heard," I said. "But there's one rule you forgot, Mrs. Cole." "Oh?" she asked, amused. "What's that?" "Never threaten someone when you don't know what they have to lose." She laughed, a brittle sound. "You really think you're dangerous? You're wearing a gown that isn't even designer." I smiled faintly. "Exactly." She blinked, uncertain for the first time, and I realized that arrogance was her armor. She mistook silence for weakness. I brushed past her toward the mirror, straightening my veil. "Behind me," she muttered. "After today, you belong to us." I met her eyes in the reflection. "After today," I said quietly, "everyone will know exactly who belongs to whom." She left without another word. I stood alone, staring at the woman in the glass. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into a coffee shop and fallen for a smile. This one had scars and secrets and a plan. I slipped the flash drive into the hidden pocket sewn into my bouquet and took a deep breath. Outside, the organ began to play. My father knocked once. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Let's go to war." The walk down the aisle felt endless and immediate all at once. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, the whispers, the envy, the judgment, but all I saw was Damien at the altar, looking nervous and smug, a man who thought he had already won. Aria sat in the front row, in a cream dress that could have been mistaken for bridal, her smile a polished lie. Veronica's diamonds glittered under the light. The pastor began the ceremony, words about love and trust and union floating above us like a cruel joke. I barely heard him. I was counting heartbeats, waiting for the part where everything changed. "Do you, Damien Cole, take this woman?" "I do," he said confidently. The crowd murmured approval. "And do you, Lena Hart, take this, man. I paused. The room stilled. Damien squeezed my hands. Lena? He whispered, a hint of warning in his voice. I smiled, finally meeting his eyes. Before I answer, I said clearly, my voice carrying through the hush, I think everyone here deserves to see something beautiful. I turned to the projector, raised the remote, and connected my phone. The first slide flickered onto the screen behind us, and in that frozen second before the gasps began, I saw the confusion on Damien's face turn to terror. But that moment belongs to the next chapter. They say there is a sound the world makes when the truth finally walks into the room, a sharp kind of silence, as if the air itself holds its breath. That was the sound that filled the church when the screen behind us flickered from soft stained glass to a hard white rectangle of light. For a second nothing moved. Damien's fingers tightened around mine. Lena, he hissed through his smile, what are you doing? In the front row, Veronica was already half standing, one jeweled hand frozen mid-gesture. Aria only tilted her head, like someone watching a mildly interesting trailer. I let the silence stretch just long enough for 300 people to lean forward, then pressed the button in my hand. The first slide appeared, a screenshot of a message thread between Damien and Aria. No explanation, no narration, just words. Aria, you sure you want to go through with this circus? Damien, relax. It's 1 year of pretending. She signs, we look stable, investors calm down. Then we're done. Aria, I hate watching you with her. Damien, you'll live. You get the company either way. A few people laughed uncertainly, the way you laugh at something you hope is a joke. I clicked again. Another screenshot, dated 3 weeks earlier. Aria, did your waitress read the prenup or just sign like a good girl? Damien, she signed. She should be grateful. She's getting the Cole name and a used car at the end. The laughter died. Someone near the center row whispered, is that real? The pastor shifted behind us, clutching his Bible like a life raft. I lifted the microphone from its stand. For anyone wondering, I said, my voice steady in the stunned quiet. Yes, these are real messages. No, this is not part of the ceremony. This is simply how my fiancé and his family talk about me when they think I can't hear. Damien lunged for the remote, but I stepped away, bouquet in one hand, plastic rectangle in the other. Turn it off, he muttered. Lena, stop. We can talk about this later. Later was what you were counting on, I replied softly. Later is where people like you hide things. I clicked again. The next slide was the family business chat, blown up large enough that even the people in the back could read it. Veronica, she'll sign. Girls like that always do. Graham, make sure the prenup covers the shares. I won't have a waitress walking off with part of the company. Aria, relax. She'll be lucky if she leaves with a used car and a sad little story. Damien, it's handled. Just focus on the investors. A low wave rolled through the room, gasps, curses, the scrape of someone standing too quickly. Veronica shot to her feet. This is a violation of privacy, she shrieked. You have no right to put our conversations on that screen. I turned my head toward her. Privacy is for people who don't use it as a shield for cruelty, I said. But don't worry. If you don't like words, we can move on to numbers. One click, and the slide changed. Rows of transactions appeared, arrows flowing from Cole Dynamics into a neat network of shell companies and back into accounts controlled by Graham and Veronica. The harsh projector light cut pale lines across their faces. For those of you who invested with the Coles, I said, this is where your money really went. Not into growth, not into research, into a maze designed to turn your trust into their private savings. A man in the third row rose halfway from his seat. That's my fund, he said hoarsely. You promised my board fixed returns. Graham turned red. You don't know what you're looking at, he snapped. She isn't an accountant. This is taken out of context. You're right, I said. I'm not an accountant. I'm just the woman you expected to stand here and smile. The accountants are the ones who built these summaries. And the people in the back, I nodded toward the 2 plainclothes agents, can discuss the legal context with you afterward. Heads turned. The men who had been invisible a moment before now sat straighter, eyes fixed on the altar. I clicked again. The life insurance policy and a page from the amended prenup filled the screen side by side, key lines highlighted. This clause adjusts everything if Damien dies within the first year of our marriage, I said. In that case, his assets and a very generous payout skip his wife entirely and go to his designated beneficiary. I looked at Arya. Do you want to tell them who that is? Her mouth trembled, but nothing came out. It's you, I said. You get his company and his money. I get to be the grieving nobody with a used car. Convenient, isn't it? A woman in the second row whispered, "My God," and clutched her husband's arm. Veronica made a choking sound. We would never hurt our own son, she snapped. How dare you imply? You've hurt people for less than money before, I interrupted. Some of them fell downstairs. Some of them just disappeared from photos. Another click, and a decades-old headline appeared. Socialite Evelyn Cole dies in tragic fall. Investigation closed. I didn't spell it out. I didn't have to. Enough people in this room remembered the whispers. The weight in the air shifted. For the first time since I'd met them, the Coles were not the ones holding the room. Damien grabbed my wrist again, his grip desperate now. Lena, please, he said. I didn't know about the policy. I didn't know they said those things. I love you. Don't do this. I looked at him, at the panic in his eyes, and realized that whatever softness I'd felt for him had burned away the moment I saw my sister's life rewritten in their group chat. You knew enough, I said quietly. You knew how they talked about me. You knew they were using me as a prop. You knew there were women before me who vanished after generous settlements. You didn't need a policy to tell you what kind of story you were part of. You just chose not to look. He flinched. We can still fix this, he whispered. We can leave. I'll walk out with you right now. We don't need any of this. For a heartbeat I imagined it, dropping the mic, ripping off the veil, disappearing into some anonymous city again. Then I remembered why I'd left home in the first place, and why I'd called my father back. Running hadn't saved Melissa. It had only kept me from witnessing the damage. No, I said. I'm done running, and I'm done being Lena. The word hung there. Damien's brows knitted. Then who are you? He asked. The room leaned in with him. I took a breath that felt like crossing a border. My name, I said, is Elena Hartwell. The reaction was immediate. Recognition moved faster than the sound system. Several investors turned in their seats to stare at my father, who sat very still in the front pew, his expression unreadable. Someone whispered, Hartwell Holdings, like a curse and a prayer. Veronica actually laughed once, a high, broken sound. No, she said. No, you're lying. Hartwell's daughters don't live in tiny apartments. They don't serve coffee to nobodies. They do when they're trying to find out who loves them without a balance sheet, I replied. 8 years ago, I walked away from buildings with our name on them because I was tired of being currency. I became Lena so I could be ordinary. Your son met that girl. Said he hated entitlement. Said he loved hard work. I believed him. I believed you were different. I turned back to Damien. You even proved me right in a way, I added. You hired people to dig into my past because you were so sure I was hiding money from you. You were terrified I might be like you. Color drained from his face. You saw that? He whispered. I saw everything, I said. I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You spent months afraid I was marrying you for your fortune. You never once considered that you were the one marrying up. His throat worked. What are you saying? I'm saying, I answered. You didn't marry up, Damien. I was the one marrying down. Something in him broke then. His shoulders slumped, and for a second he looked almost young, almost honest, like the man I'd met in that coffee shop. It was too late. At the back of the church, one of the agents stepped into the aisle, badge visible now. Damien Cole, he called, voice cutting cleanly through the murmur. Veronica Cole, Graham Cole, Arya Cole. We need you to come with us to answer some questions. Graham rose slowly, as if gravity had doubled. Veronica exploded, shouting about lawyers and defamation, and how none of this would stand. Arya tried to slip toward a side door, but Marcus was already there, lounging against the frame. Bad time to leave your own show, he murmured, and tilted his head toward the aisle. As the agents moved closer, Damien turned to me one last time. Did you ever love me? He asked, the question raw. I thought of cheap pizza on my couch, of his head in my lap, of nights when he had seemed almost kind. I loved the version of you that lived in that apartment, I said. The one who talked about becoming better than where he came from. I never met the man who sat in those chats and let them talk about me like a purchase. They took him then, guiding him down the steps from the altar. The guests watched, some gaping, some filming on their phones despite the pastor's frantic gestures. When Veronica passed me, she spat. "You think you've won? This isn't over." "You're right," I said calmly. "It isn't. The rest of it will happen in rooms with judges instead of flowers." The doors closed behind them. The silence that followed was nothing like the one that had greeted the first slide. That had been the hush of people who didn't know. This was the hush of people who could never again say they hadn't been warned. I turned back to the crowd, bouquet limp now in my hand. "I'm sorry your afternoon didn't go as planned," I said. A few people laughed weakly. "You came for a fairy tale. You got a forensic audit. If you invested with the Coles, our attorneys will be in touch. If you didn't, then at least you leave here with a story that might make you ask harder questions next time someone in a perfect suit promises you the world." I put the microphone back on its stand. The ceremony lay in ruins around us, no vows, no rings, no kiss, just truth hanging in the rafters where flowers should have been. Somewhere in the middle rows, someone began to clap. It was hesitant and offbeat, and not for me personally, but for the idea that once, just once, someone had refused to be quiet in a room built for polite lies. I didn't bow. I didn't cry. I just stepped down from the altar and walked up the aisle alone, my dress whispering over the floor. The life they had planned for me lay shattered behind my back like broken glass. Strangely, as the cold air hit my face when the doors opened, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a door I should have walked through years ago, a first, clean beginning that was finally mine. They say that after a storm, the world doesn't go quiet, it just exhales. The morning after the wedding, I woke to that sound, the city breathing again. Rain had fallen overnight, washing the confetti off the church steps and leaving the air sharp and clean. The newspapers called it the wedding that ended an empire. Investors called it justice. The Coles called it betrayal. I called it freedom. Damien was arrested that afternoon for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Veronica and Graham faced the same charges, plus obstruction. Aria was taken in for evidence tampering. Apparently she'd tried to wipe servers while agents were still in the building. They all made bail within days, of course. Money has a way of buying you temporary air. But for the first time, their names no longer inspired envy, they inspired caution. Their partners pulled out, their accounts were frozen, and the empire that had seemed untouchable was suddenly begging for oxygen. I didn't celebrate. I sat in my apartment, still half filled with wedding gifts and lies, and felt something colder than victory. It wasn't satisfaction. It was the weight of finally being seen. For 8 years I had lived as Lena Hart, invisible by design. Now everyone knew my real name again, and with it came expectations, reporters, strangers who wanted to shake my hand as if courage was contagious. I didn't feel brave. I felt human. The day of the arraignment, I walked past a row of cameras without speaking. My father offered to stand beside me, but I told him I needed to do this alone. The world had watched a woman fall apart on a stage. Now it would watch her stand up without needing anyone to hold her crown. Inside the courtroom, Damien looked smaller somehow. His suit hung wrong, his hair uncombed. When they read the charges, he didn't look at me until the end. Our eyes met for half a heartbeat. I expected anger, but there was only exhaustion. Maybe he'd loved me in his own broken way. Maybe he just loved the reflection of himself he saw in my forgiveness. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. When the judge denied a motion to dismiss, his lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, and that was when I saw him cry for the first time. Not because he was sorry, but because he finally understood what it felt like to lose control of the story. Outside, reporters shouted my name. One asked if I felt vindicated. "No," I said. "I feel awake." That night, I went to see Melissa. She was sitting by the same window as always, but the garden outside was blooming again. When she saw me, her eyes filled, and she whispered, "You did it." "We did it," I said. "You survived long enough for me to remember who I was." She smiled faintly. "So what happens now?" It was a question I'd been avoiding. For months, revenge had been the only map I followed. Now that the war was over, the quiet scared me. Now, I said slowly. We build something better. I meant it. Within a month, my father and I launched the Evelyn Foundation, named after the woman whose death had been erased by the Coles money. It provided legal aid to victims of financial and emotional exploitation, people like Melissa, like the investors who had lost everything, like the women who believed love could fix cruelty. I met them every week. Single mothers, retired teachers, small business owners. They all said the same thing, that they'd trusted too easily, that they'd stayed silent too long. Every story felt like a reflection of my own, and every time I listened, the old anger turned into something steadier. Not forgiveness, exactly. Understanding. In those months, I began to write again letters, not to Damien, but to myself. The girl who had hidden her name needed to know that disappearing isn't the same as being free. Freedom is when you can stand in a room full of people and tell the truth without shaking. I also found out I was pregnant. The timing shocked me at first, but when the doctor smiled and said, 8 weeks, I realized life has its own sense of irony. I didn't plan it, but maybe that was the point. This child would never grow up in lies. When I told my parents, my mother cried. My father simply nodded. A new beginning, he said, his voice quiet. Not for the Hartwells, but for you. I smiled. Maybe for both. In the evenings, when the city lights flickered through the window, I played old jazz records and talked to the baby. I told them that wealth means nothing without kindness, that silence is powerful only when it's a choice, that love without honesty is just performance. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass and barely recognize the woman staring back, the same face. Yes, but the eyes no longer apologizing for their strength. One night I received a letter from prison. The handwriting was Damien's, neat and familiar. I read only the first line. I finally understand what you meant about marrying down. I didn't need to read the rest. I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. Some stories don't need sequels. 6 months later, the case closed. The Coles were convicted. Damien received 15 years, his parents 10, Aria, 18. The papers called me the heiress who brought down her own wedding. I laughed when I read it because they missed the point. I hadn't brought anything down. I'd simply turned the lights on. On the anniversary of the wedding, I went back to that same church. It was empty now, quiet except for the echo of my footsteps. I stood where I'd once said no and whispered a different kind of vow to myself, to the baby, to anyone who'd ever been told to stay small. Never again, I said. Never pretend to be less just to be loved. The sun poured through the windows, scattering gold across the floor, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. I wasn't a bride or an heiress or a victim. I was just Elena Hartwell, a woman who had lost everything pretending to be nobody, and found everything by standing up as herself. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The world respects noise, but it remembers silence, the kind that holds its head high, that waits, that outlasts thunder. That's the silence I'll live by. So if you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Stories like mine aren't about revenge, they're about waking up. If you believe in truth, in dignity, in women who refuse to be quiet when the world tells them to kneel, then don't leave yet. There are more stories waiting, more voices that deserve to be heard. Subscribe, stay, and share this moment with me, because sometimes all it takes to change the ending is someone who decides not to look away.